If you're building an intermodal module, you're going to need a shit ton of containers. How are you going to get that done without breaking the bank? Paper models might be a solution. Bob Johnson with PK&W Railroad coming at you with another video. This time from a park in Aspinwall, Pennsylvania, which, not unlike a lot of places in Pittsburgh, has a ton of railroad archaeology. So if you're building an intermodal module, you need a lot of containers. It may be that you can use a photographic backdrop of a container yard with cranes and distant containers, and you're probably going to have detailed models up close to the edge of your layout of cranes and 3D containers. But there's going to be some distance between the front of your layout and the backdrop that you're going to need to fill with containers potentially hundreds of containers. Let's just say, for the sake of easy math, that a pre-decorated container costs $10. It would be easy to spend $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 on containers populating a yard if you were to buy pre-decorated plastic containers. So one potential solution is to use containers that are paper models. Now, paper models are a lot of fun to put together. They're economical and they're pre-decorated, so once you put them together, they're basically done and ready to drop on your layout. Today's video is going to be comparing two of the manufacturers of paper model containers that I've identified. Those are Digcom Designs and Team Track Models. Now first, if you have not tried a paper model, they are relatively easy to put together. The techniques are a little different from putting together plastic models, and I will cover that in a subsequent video, and I'll link to that at the end of this video. But if you haven't done one before, I really recommend the Team Track site. The Team Track site has a lot of great instructions about how to do things. Keep in mind that where they say you have to use CA, cyanocrylate, you don't have to do that. You can use paper glue if you have a little bit more patience. And one of the things they have at Team Track is they have this free kit of a concrete loading dock. Great place to start. Download that kit for free, print it out, build it, and you'll see how easy this can be. Another point to keep in mind about paper models is that you can use them to force perspective. So once you have the digital file downloaded, you can print as many as you want, of course, and you could also reduce the scale of that printout in order to force perspective towards the back of the layout. So you might have HO models in the foreground, you might shrink them down. The first row of containers on the other side of some tracks might be 25% reduced, the next one 50% reduced, then your photo backdrop. And so you'd have great force perspective in your intermodal yard scene. So the first point of comparison that I'm going to hit is price. Digcom Designs charges between $5.95 and $6.95 for each download. And those downloads are either of one container, so for example, one 53-foot container, or at the $6.95 price point, you can get a 9-block, which is really convenient for populating an intermodal yard module. Now, Team Track, on the other hand, for $2.98, you get a file that contains a 20-foot container, a 40-foot container, a 45-foot container, and a 53-foot container. So that's a pretty sweet deal. Here's an example of one of the 9 stacks from Digicom Designs. More about this later. Now, the next point of comparison is the website. The TeamTrack website that I've already recommended you to is really well done. Not only does it have a lot of great instructional material, and I didn't find any instructions on the Digicom Design website, it also has an account set up for you, so you can go back to that account and download your files at any time. You don't even have to save them on your own computer, I imagine. But if you can't find them, you just want a fresh download on a different computer, you can go to their website and do that. So that's really convenient. The Digicom site is fine, but I did have a problem with one of my downloads, and it wasn't due to the download, I don't think. It was due to the file itself. One of the graphic images that you need to create the 9 stacks is an end plate, one showing all door ends of the containers. And that particular graphic on the file I downloaded for the all Werner container 9 stack, there were only 3 container ends showing. The other 6 were missing. This was fixed very quickly by Carlos Rodriguez, but not fast enough that it didn't miss my trip to the printer to print out the file, so it was an inconvenience. So when you're downloading from either site, eyeball the file before you download it to make sure it's complete. Now, the next point of comparison I'm going to make is on the design of the files and how the models are actually put together. And again, there'll be a link at the end of this video to a completely different video about how to actually build these containers, and so you'll really see the difference. But at a very high level, the Digicom design file is one sheet of paper or poster board, depending upon what you print it out on. You cut that out, you fold it up, and it makes a box. And you score the edges where you make the folds, and so those folds are very crisp. But the box is very flimsy. The TeamTrack design, on the other hand, involves individual pieces of paper printed out and colored for every side of the container. You cut out mat board and fold that paper around the mat board, so you now have very stiff sides and bottoms and ends of your container that you then glue together to make a solid box. So when you're done with the TeamTrack construction, it's very solid. But because of that wrapping process, I've never been able to get a really crisp edge on those boxes, and so I'm not totally happy with the way those come out. I've done boxes for tractor trailers using the TeamTrack method, and they've lasted for years. They're really solid, so that is highly recommended. But again, it's a little different construction technique. I have to say, I like the way the Digicom design boxes come out, as long as you reinforce them, and that'll be covered in my subsequent video. Another thing you should know about these two manufacturers is that there's a huge selection of containers at Digicom Design. There are nowhere near as many types of containers available on TeamTrack. TeamTrack has buildings, one of which I think it's called Modular Warehouse. I'm absolutely going to try building. But they don't have as many types of containers. They have more tractor trailers than Digicom. Digicom is all transportation, tractor trailers, and containers. But there's just a vast selection on Digicom Design, vast selection. So that's definitely a point of difference. However, the TeamTrack site has some very generic containers that don't have any designs on them. And that may be convenient because they're not going to draw as much attention away from your models if you have kind of generic containers in the background. Additionally, the TeamTrack models are weathered. They've got some patch out, they've got some things that make them look a lot better. The Digicom Designs containers are really pristine, and you're going to have to weather them if you want to get a really realistic look. I'll cover that weathering in my subsequent video. So in conclusion, If you're willing to put in some extra work on the Digicom design containers to stiffen them up, I think they're probably the better choice. Even though they are a little bit more expensive, the selection is outstanding and the method of construction leads to a crisper box. But if you're new to paper models, you have to check out TeamTrack. They're really going to educate you. They've got that free download. You really have to try their site out. Lastly, while I'm doing this project for my intermodal yard build, and I'm most concerned about populating a yard with a lot of containers, the reality is that these containers look pretty darn good and they could be used on a train. They're going to be a lot lighter than plastic containers, which might help your pulling capacity in your locomotives and operating your model railroad. It would also help you on expense. I believe studies have shown that people really focus on the first few cars and the last few cars of a train, and in the middle, they're not really absorbing a lot of detail. So you could have your pre-decorated or painted plastic containers in the first few cars, and in the last few cars, you could populate the middle of your train very economically and pretty realistically with some paper models. So I recommend you give this a try. Here's a comparison of a paper O&E container and a plastic O&E container. Obviously not the same size container, but still you can see that the paper container doesn't fare too badly. Obviously not as good, but a fraction of the cost. One of the things covered in that video is how to stiffen these 9-stack Digicom design models. This was my first attempt. I stiffened the ends. I put a spine down the middle, but I did not do anything on the outside of this box. Hopefully you can hear that. Very flimsy. This is printed on heavy bond paper, not cardstock, but nonetheless, I had to find a way to stiffen these. That'll be covered in my subsequent video. Well, thanks for watching. If you like model railroading and building models, I hope you'll consider subscribing. Until next time, Bob Johnson with PK&W Railroad signing off. Happy modeling.